All right, we have roped in Dr. Lesley Ann Foster, who's the Executive Director of the Masimanyane Women's Rights International, Professor Lisa Vetten, who's a gender specialist on violence against women, as well as Noluyolo Mabuza, President of the South African Women Lawyers Association Student Chapter, in order to help us unpack the special focus discussion. So, ladies, it's great to have each and every one of you with us on this special focus discussion, and I'm glad it's all women. So, a lot is currently happening on this case, on the slain Olerato matter. So welcome news of the arrest of some of the suspects as well as the demise of the other early this morning. But ladies, I want us to look at our current judicial laws and how perps are often seemingly accorded more rights than the actual victims. Should our judiciary be looking at new ways in order to tighten laws on such egregious crimes concerning GBV and specifically femicide and children? Dr. Foster, let's start with you.
Yes, I think what we've been seeing in recent months, particularly around the issue of femicide, is a very slack investigative processes and a disconnect between what's happening to women on the ground, what's happening to women in reality, and what the criminal justice response is. So we hear here about, some men that have been out on bail. They were actually being looked for because of the crimes that they've committed, and they went on to, murder Olerato, which is very, very tragic. And we're seeing a lot of that happening across the country now. So it is a very worrying development for us that different parts of the criminal justice system are not working comprehensively and cohesively together. And it's only when somebody is murdered that, the wheels of justice begin to turn. So we have to, as a country, really reflect on, are these laws adequate enough? The issue around, bail and parole, is that necessary, particularly in cases around gender-based violence? What are the other mechanisms that we can use to protect women? Of course, there are societal norms and standards, societal factors that lead to increased risk and vulnerability of women, and we have to address those as well. How do we make sure that women are safe within our societies and our communities? Big questions to ask, and it's not a simple answer, because there are, serious drivers of gender-based violence that are not adequately addressed within our criminal justice system, within our social systems, and politically. Because I'm just busy reading a paper now, we have so many mechanisms and so many institutions and formations that are all set up to protect women. But what we find is they continue to be vulnerable to these heinous crises, these heinous cases of femicide, and they really are brutal and horrible. And this young woman, went to meet somebody, which should be a safe enough activity. She took precautions by letting her friends know where she was going and asking them to track her, and it didn't help. So even at that level, if you think about the fact that she tried her best to protect herself because she knew she was going out with somebody she didn't know, it wasn't enough. She lost her life anyway. So that, I think, is the sad reality of where we are in our society today.
Absolutely, Doctor, because the questions now are, where are we safe exactly? We can take all the safety precautions, but even right in your home, you can still be a victim of GBV. So, Noluyolo, I want you to also maybe just from a legal perspective, just weigh in on that initial question of mine, because also in South Africa currently, Schedule 6 offences are very serious crimes that often carry life imprisonment, right? And the Criminal Law Amendment Act actually mandates minimum sentences for these offences, limiting judicial discretion significantly. Bail applications there are more challenging, requiring the accused to demonstrate exceptional circumstances in order to be released. But we know that this oversight and discretion is not often exercised diligently through our court system. And the fact that the suspects, as Dr. Of course has initially alluded to, the suspects had been arrested just the last month is testament to this. So how do we then rectify the lack of adequate oversight by our courts so that repeat offenders or serious offenders don't get bail?
Thank you so much for the question. It's quite unfortunate what happened to Olerato. And in terms of looking at the fact that these suspects were previously arrested before and got out on bail, it's quite unfortunate because it is just testament that there's so much work that should be done in our justice system. There is the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide that was adopted in 2020, and still up to this day, it is not as effective as it should be in terms of protecting women. I, for one, as a GBV activist, I really do believe in women being equipped with protecting themselves, like self-defense instruments. I am a full advocate for self-defense instruments because I feel like in terms of the legal and the judiciary, there's still some work that needs to be done in order to have harsher and more effective laws that put perpetrators accountable, that hold perpetrators accountable. Yes, thank you.
Ladies, I mean, let's talk about this. I know, Dr. Foster, you mentioned it pretty much about this slew of legislation that we seemingly have on paper that we're actually not sure actually if it is actually exercised accordingly. In fact, let me welcome Professor Lisa Vetten. I hear she's joining us. She's back with us on this discussion. In fact, let me start with her. Professor Vetten, in 2022, President Cyril Ramaphosa had signed into law legislation. We're actually talking about this with my two guests, aimed at strengthening efforts to end GBV with victim-centered focus on combating this pandemic. And this had outlined all sorts of embellished plans like the Criminal Law Amendment Bill, the Criminal Related Matters Amendment Bill, and Domestic Violence and Amendment Bill. I remember the president there emphatically stating that such offenders will not or should not be granted bail. But 3 years later, no effective or tangible action. The recent crime stats have showed that GBV, in fact, has increased. So then where are we lacking in terms of rigorous application of our current laws?
There are very many problems that we need to take account of. I mean, I think one of the things we can never forget is that a law is merely a piece of paper. It requires people who are adequately trained and equipped to implement it effectively, and it needs resources in order for it to be adequately equipped. We have problems in both areas. I think at this point in time, if we look at the criminal justice system, we're in a period of fiscal austerity. So that means budgets are being cut across the board. And you can see in the courts, for instance, that the number of personnel they have now is less than they had in 2015. The police are facing a similar problem. So what happens is that the quality of work that people do when they're handling a whole lot of cases and they don't have enough time to do so means that things do obviously slip. You also have sometimes inadequate. You have another problem in that many will say your more experienced prosecutors will leave and go and work in the private sector where they will get more money. So you have this constant churn going on, if the process haven't been frozen, of people who may not necessarily have sufficient experience in dealing with things like bail applications. And so somebody might get bail because the prosecutor doesn't sufficiently oppose it, even though they should not have been given bail. And then, of course, we have problems that the court buildings don't work. There isn't functional equipment in order to do a number of things like allow for witnesses to testify sometimes via CCTV, for instance. So you have a range of problems that relate to just the administration of the police and the courts that are getting in the way of applying the law effectively. And that's before we start talking about the questions of whether or not people are adequately trained. So yes, we have wonderful laws, but we don't have the people to implement them or the resources to do so. And the necessary oversight is not being exercised, I think, and action not being taken when people do make very serious mistakes. I mean, the Omatozo case is one in point.
Dr. Foster, when judiciary fails, let's say a magistrate in this matter actually allows somebody bail without having considered the serious conditions that need to be, of course, considered before granting these offenders this specific type of bail, who do we blame and how do we hold those magistrates or judges to account? And I also want to hear from you as well, Noluyolo.
I think the criminal justice system has got its own mechanisms for holding people to account. The question is whether this is really adhered to and whether it is actually implemented. But I think what we need to be thinking about is the root cause or the structural drivers of violence is inequality. Another structural violence is, the poverty that people face, unemployment, all of these things. We don't take that into account. But I think the most profound is that we are a deeply patriarchal society, which gives rise to this inequality, which gives rise to the lapses in our systems. And with the patriarchal system, it always favors men and the male ideology. Of men being in the powerful positions and making the decisions that suit them best, rather than the taking into account the injustices that are perpetrated on people. So even if we look at our judicial system, it is peopled with strong patriarchal, powerful males that are not at all interested in the issues of gender equality, the issues of accountability when it comes to the killing of women. Women have low status in our society. They continue to have that. And all the initiatives that we have put in place, the fantastic National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence, the mechanisms, the signing of the Declaration on Violence, the Interministerial Committee, there's so many mechanisms that are put in place to address gender-based violence. But on every level, you come up against patriarchy. You come up against males who have a particular view of women, which is not that they should be entitled to their human rights, that they should be protected. And these are some of the structural problems that we face with gender-based violence.
All right. Noluyolo? Noluyolo, you still there? Very quickly.
I definitely agree with that. I'm still there. Am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead with your closing arguments.
Okay. Yes, I very much agree with Lesley Ann's sentiments that sometimes justice becomes a luxury of the rich. It's unfortunate. It's the systematic inequalities that we face as a country. And to be honest with you, there are so many factors that get cases such as Olerado's case mishandled in courts. It's also corruption from the police. I live in the townships, and what I've learned is that most cases, most GBV cases that are reported barely make it to court. And if they make it to court, there is no conviction, none whatsoever. There is little to no accountability for perpetrators. This is why you then find that people say that justice will always be in favor of the perpetrator. So both Lesley Ann and Lisa Vetten said very powerful sentiments that our laws are great. However, it's the administration that is the problem. It's the administering of justice that becomes problematic, and especially amongst very marginalized communities.
All right. Ladies, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Lisa, unfortunately, you joined us very late there. We're going to have to leave it there, ladies. But nonetheless, thank you so much for that great insight there. That is Dr. Lesley Foster, Lisa Vetten, who's a gender specialist, alongside Noluyolo Mabuza, the president of South African Women Lawyers Associations.